This is lesson 17, and I'm now going to be talking about ratio analysis. And the first one I want to talk about here is liquidity. Now, there are 5 areas overall of ratio analysis. These are profitability, which we've already done, return on capital employed, gross profit margin, net profit margin. Liquidity, there are 2 ratios in this section. Gearing, 1 in this section. Efficiency, 4 in this section. And the investors' ratios, there are 2 in that section. Now, when you go to the exam, right, I've always made a big issue that the return on capital employed is the big ratio. However, you can go into the exam, do the paper, and you may find really the whole exam is on the investors' ratios, or really the whole exam is just on 2 of the efficiency ratios. Sometimes they may give you 5 or 6 ratios to work out. But the absolute key point is that you must understand all of them. You may be lucky and you may be asked the ones that you would like to be taught. Now, from the examiner's viewpoint, most students will understand return on capital employed, gross profit margin, net profit margin, and also the liquidity ratios, and they may have a reasonable understanding of gearing. But often these 2 are the ones that are left out. So more recently, they've tended to ask questions on these 2, just to make the paper a little bit harder, which is correct really, because you really must get an overview of all of them. However, the liquidity one is a pretty important one. And I banged on and on this course about cash flow, and cash flow is really, really important. Without cash, you're going to go under. That's what liquidity tests. Okay. So there is a thing in business studies called current assets and also current liabilities. And these will appear on a balance sheet, but we're not going to do those until probably about lesson 19 on here. Current assets are made of cash, debtors and stock. And these are all assets that can easily be converted into cash. Obviously cash is cash, so that is the most liquid of the assets. Debtors are also pretty liquid in terms of the assets, and stock is probably the least liquid. Well, it is the least liquid of the current assets, because it may not be that easy to turn all that stock into cash. So therefore we have 2 ratios as regards this. We have the current ratio, which is current assets divided by current liabilities, and you will always come up with what I call it dot 1. So you'll have a number in here which could be 1 to 1. That means your current assets are equal to your current liabilities, or it could be 1.5 to 1, which will mean your current assets are 50% bigger than your current liabilities. So in this particular example, if you wanted to work out this one here, we just add them all up, 120, 160. So that's 160 divided by 80, and that would be 2 to 1. So that would tell us for every £1 of the current liabilities, we have £2 of the current assets, and we do not have a liquidity problem. Okay? So that is the current asset ratio. We also have something else which is called the acid test ratio. The acid test ratio is liquid assets divided by current liabilities. Now I prefer this terminology because liquid assets are literally just your cash and debtors, and then that is divided by your current liabilities. So in this case, it'd be 40 plus 80, 120. 120 divided by 80 would once again be 1.5 to 1. So as regards the acid test ratio, we would also not have a liquidity problem. You can also write it as current assets minus stock divided by current liabilities, and that's how they put it on the exam paper. All of these ratios here are written out on the exam paper, apart from gross profit margin and net profit margin. However, you do have to understand them. The acid test ratio is a tougher test because stock is not included, because you can't readily convert your stock into cash. And lesson 1 is pretty serious on here. So lesson 1 on the current ratio, dangerous. 1 to 2, okay, but you might have liquidity problems. 2.5 is actually the right number to be at, and more than 3, there is too much cash in the business, and the cash should always be working for you. However, sometimes it's a good thing to have cash, because you may want to make a quick purchase, you may want to buy something which is on the cheap. On an exam paper, and this is a mistake that a lot of students will make, is as soon as the liquidity, say the current ratio is less than 1, so it's 0.8 to 1, which will mean for every £1 worth of current liabilities, you only have 80 pence worth of current assets. That highlights a liquidity problem. And therefore the candidates will then say, okay, the business is going to go bust next week. That is not correct. You've got to look at the whole picture. And often you might find that the return on capital employed is really high, say it's 24%. That means the business is getting a 24% return on the money that has been invested in that business. Now, clearly, overall, this business is doing well, although it has got a liquidity problem. So you may need to say, well, okay, the business is doing really well, but maybe it's time that we sold some fixed assets maybe and improve the firm's liquidity. So if you've got a BMW outside, you can sell for 20,000 quid. You can then put it into the current assets, and then your current assets are going to grow by £20,000. So it's very important that you look at the overall picture and aren't drawn into making some quick judgments on there. And if you do that, you're actually combining data, which is top level. Okay, so this section here is liquidity. And this information you find out on a balance sheet. I'm not going to show you a balance sheet yet because I'm just building you little different sections of it. So when you get to balance sheet, you'll know parts of it. But what a balance sheet does, it shows the financial net worth of a business.